pjnet.tv. It's a brand new week, and we are getting ready to introduce first-time guest number 275 here, where we provide a platform for everyday Christians to share their walk with Christ. And we are running the bumper, we are recording, we are streaming, we are ready to count it down to Studio 36 Alpha, starting now. Well, good evening. Welcome. This is pjnet.tv. I'm your host, Coach Prasick, and that is the screen where, as of tonight, 275 different guests have or will have appeared as soon as we introduce our guest, who is brought to us through a connection by Joy Kidney, who joins us in the pjnet.tv chat room. Speaking of which, if you're not at the pjnet.tv chat room, you're doing the internet wrong. You should go there. You can watch the program there and meet some wonderful friends and make new ones. And tonight, we have with us Jolene Philo from the great state of Iowa. And it was through Joy Kidney that this arrangement was made. How do you know Joy?
I know Joy. We've attended the Cedar Falls Writers Conference a couple times together, and Joy has actually worked with my daughter, who's a book coach and an editor, and she and Joy have worked on some manuscripts together.
And she's not that far down the road, I understand.
No,
I suggested,
about 30 miles.
Yeah, she should have just come to your house, and we could have had you both on here tonight. But that'd take the spotlight off of you. Jolene, you have got an amazing radiance in your face and in your smile and in your overall countenance. And most people would say, you know what, she's just got it all together. Nothing has ever gone wrong in her life. She's got it made. She is living the dream. But that would not be the entire story.
That's right. In fact, my story, the part about where things didn't go right, the anniversary of that was 40 years ago today. When our first child was born, we lived in a little town in northwest South Dakota, and he was born full term, but shortly after his birth, we found out that he had a birth condition that was going to require immediate surgery for him to live. And so he was life-flighted to Omaha, Nebraska, where he had surgery at the University of Nebraska to repair that. And that kind of began a whole new stage of our lives where, though my husband and I had been believers for a long time, our faith really had to kick into overdrive to deal with all the complications and everything that came along with having this very medically fragile child. I'm not going to tell you the whole story because that would take forever. But in the first 5 years of his life, he had a total of 7 surgeries and hundreds of medical procedures to get all of his esophagus and his lungs and everything working correctly. We moved to Iowa when he was about 3. And we've been there ever since. I was a teacher. My husband was a social worker who later became a nurse because of all the stuff that we'd experienced with our son. And through and our son is doing fine now. He's an adult. He has a farm. He's doing very well. But there was a lot of time when he was really struggling, and we were struggling also, that I kept wishing for someone that I could talk to about what we were going through. This was 1982. There was no internet. We were in such an isolated community. There wasn't anybody who was going through what we were going through. And I kept wishing, even once we moved to Iowa and had more people around us, man, I wish there was somebody who had written a book that could have helped us. And it was a number of years later, when our son was basically in high school and getting ready to go off on his own, and we had a daughter who was 6 years younger than him, that really God kind of parted the waters, provided an opportunity for me to go to a writing conference where I showed them some of the things that I've written. And I was hoping they would just say to me, oh, keep that to yourself. I was writing stories about growing up with my father, who had been disabled, just for my kids. to know him as more than a person in a wheelchair. Um, and people kept saying, you should get those published. So I went to this conference hoping that someone would say, just keep them for your kids. That's enough. Because I knew as a full-time teacher and raising 2 kids, I really didn't have time to do writing. And the editor I met with said, you should be trying to get things published. And truly, over the next few years, the doors opened. I was able to get a different job that left me time to learn about writing and speaking. And that started in 2003. And in 2008, my first book came out that was a devotional for parents raising children with disabilities. And since then, I've had 5 books that have come up, no, 6, for the disability and special needs community. Many of them have been to support parents going through things like what we had gone through, kind of just to be there with them, letting them know they're not alone, letting them know that God cares about them, and just giving them practical advice on where to find resources, how to talk to doctors, how to deal with school systems. I've also written one book that's called Every Child Welcome, and it's a ministry handbook for churches that want to include all children at church. And I co-wrote that with Katie Weatherby. We are both parents of children who had medical conditions, and we both have special ed backgrounds. So we wrote this book thinking of the volunteers in churches that may want to have a disability program, but perhaps they don't have a formal program, or maybe they're a small rural church and they're welcoming one child with Down syndrome into their program, and they just want to know how to adapt curriculum for those kids. And so that's what that book does, helps provide a tool for volunteers and people who want to welcome every child at church. I've also written a book about post-traumatic stress disorder in children called Does My Child Have PTSD? Because one of the things that we discovered when our son reached his middle school and high school years was that he was dealing with PTSD caused by all of the early medical intervention he'd gone through. Thankfully, he was able to receive some really excellent treatment as a young adult that was able to teach him how to deal with those traumatic memories, how to process them, and how to cope with the vestiges of them. And so that led to that book eventually, and also led to me teaching classes for teachers about helping their children in schools that are dealing with trauma. And I even teach a college level class on that now. These are never things that I thought I was going to do. I thought that I was going to be a mom, and that I was going to be a teacher, and that I would teach until it was time for me to retire. But, God often has different ideas for us. And then the other book my most recent book for in the disability community is a book called Sharing Love Abundantly with Special Needs Families, the 5 Love Languages for Parents Raising Children with Disabilities. And that book I was able to co-write with Dr. Gary Chapman, the Love Languages guy, which is just like...
That's a big deal.
Yeah. That was not even on my radar until a friend of mine who has a child with disabilities emailed me one day and said, Jolene, when are you going to write the Love Languages version for parents raising kids with disabilities? And it was like a light bulb went off over my head. What a great idea. And my agent was able to connect with Dr. Chapman's publishing house, and that book was published in 2019. And so that one has also led to a class that I teach for teachers about creating healthy classroom climates using the 5 love languages. So it's always funny to me and interesting to me how every single thing that I've done in my life, without realizing it, I didn't know, but God knew that all of these things he was going to use later on in my life. My educational training, my parenting, all of those things were going to be part of his using me to reach and minister to other parents. Because I never want a parent to feel like I did when we were in the hospital with our son, alone and disconnected and just wondering where God was in all of that. And having to learn to cling to him all by myself without a fellowship of believers to lift me up.
What I'm hearing you say, Jolene, is that you have courageously and gracefully, for the most part, carried this burden, and you should. I think you will hear God say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." But you've done more than carry your own burden. You have opened a new vista of education, awareness, and specific tools for educators. You have ministered. The big gap that I see today, I think you have made progress. You've closed that gap. You're certainly standing in that gap. But the big gap that I see today is those of us who don't have special needs children, but we have acquaintances, we have relationships with those that do. And here is my heart is grieved. Here's how we tend to cope with it. Hey, let's go out to eat. Let's invite Jolene and her. No, let's not. We tend to simply exclude, not in a hurtful kind of way, but it's a coping mechanism because we don't know how to relate to you and your, quote, baggage. Mm-hmm. So we take the easy way out and just don't invite people like that to join us on things that we could do together. And I think that this is a crime. We need help. We need to know, that you would like to go out for a cup of coffee, but you do have a special needs child, and you can't just leave them behind. How can we? And then we go into public settings, and I remember one time a collaborator that I was working with had a child with autism. And she just said, if you have a child with autism, you're going to have embarrassing moments.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I had the distinct advantage of being raised in a family where we were caregivers for my entire life. My dad was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 2, and I can't remember him walking. And this was in the 1959 he was diagnosed. So he was in a wheelchair in the 60s when lots of places weren't very accessible. Right. That did not stop my father. He was a people person. He was going to be out among the people as long as he could. Thankfully, my little 5'1" mother was raised on a farm, and she was as strong as anyone you've ever met. And she could get Dad and his wheelchair anywhere he wanted to go. And he just went. And we just went everywhere. And Dad just kind of bulldozed anybody's misgivings or let them see that he was not a burden. And that people with disabilities aren't burdens. They are people, and the disability is second, and the person is always first. And one of the things that I'm moving into now, because as I mentioned, my son is turning 40 today, and my memories and my experiences are kind of becoming outdated for young parents today who are raising kids with special needs. Plus, there's a whole new generation of people, of parents who are coming up and taking and doing what I did when my books came out, and they are ministering to these younger parents more effectively than I can. Also, it's not particularly healthy for me to continually relive those old memories and be stuck, in that time when life has moved on. And so I'm moving from nonfiction right now into writing fiction. And my first fiction book is called See Jane Run, and it's coming out June 7th. It'll be available on Amazon. And it is actually set out in a little town very similar to where we lived in South Dakota when our son was born. And I was a country school teacher out there, and you even have a picture of the school where I taught. And the school where Jane, the protagonist of this series, the school where she teaches is very similar to the school in in CJ that I taught in. And many of her experiences are similar. And I loved teaching country school. It was a wonderful experience. But what was best about living in this very remote town, and we were 2 miles from Montana, 20 miles from North Dakota. The town had 92 people in it when we moved there in 1978. And when we moved there, all the roads going in and out of town were gravel, and that included the state highway. To this day, the 2 miles of the state highway going from town to Montana are still gravel. But that little town rallied around us after our son was born and provided a lot of support. Mothers would substitute teach for me if I had to be gone. People would take care of our garden. They cleaned our house for us. They did everything. One of the women in town learned how to take care of our son with his feeding tube so she could babysit him while I was teaching. And we just always loved that town, and we still do. We go out to visit quite frequently. And I've always thought, wouldn't it be great to set a mystery series out there in this very remote area, which is exactly what I've done. And the first book in the series, See Jane Run, is based on an actual mystery that occurred while we were out there and remains unsolved to this day. A rancher disappeared in 1978, the first year we lived there. He has never been found. His body has never been found. No one knows what happened to him. If he's still alive, if he died, what's going on, no one knows. And so in this mystery, I kind of work that in and tell what possibly could have happened to him, though, there's no way that I can know that for sure. And those books have just been a delight to write. And one of my favorite things about them is that there are many people with disabilities who are characters in the book. Because people with disabilities were part and parcel and important to that little town of 92 people. Because when you only have 92 people in your town, everybody contributes. Mm-hmm. And that included the switchboard operator. This little town was one of the last 2 in the United States to get rid of switchboard operators and go to rotary dial phones. She had a cleft palate repair, one of the very first that was ever done at Mayo Clinic, and they repaired it, but it was not elegantly done. Mm-hmm. She ran the switchboard, but she had a speech impediment that was so severe, it was very difficult to understand her. But she connected everybody in she was the main communicator in the town.
How about
her
that?
husband? They owned this little phone company. Her husband took care of all the wires and all the lines in town and in the radius, the countryside around. He was blind, legally blind, and he would climb the poles and fix the lines.
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
And so it is.
I spent 30 years in the telephony industry, and I don't know how I could do that if I couldn't see. Jolene, we've got about 1 or 2 minutes left, and we haven't talked about your website, differentdream.com.
Yes, that's my website for parents raising children with disabilities, and there's lots of posts there that provide information and resources. And my other website is called jolenephilo.com, and that's where you can find out more about my fiction writing, what's going on with that. And if you contact me through those websites, I promise that I will respond.
I know we're out of time. You must have made a lot of friends along the way.
I have. And, they're all special. Some don't. And they're not one of them is a burden.
How about that? Well, Jolene, we got a lot in the 20 minutes that we had, but I'm sure there's a whole lot that we couldn't get in. But you have blessed us, and I just admire your courage and your faith and how you have poured yourself not only into your own children. Of course, you're a mom. Moms do that. But you've poured yourself into the entire community, into the educational system, and to other parents of special needs children. That says a lot for you. And we are so proud of what you have done and what you are doing. And I hope that someone out there hears this and they are encouraged, and they are empowered, and they are uplifted by your story, and we appreciate you sharing your story here on
Well, thank you for
PJNet.
inviting me.
TV. We love you, girl. Thank you so much. Well, folks, I love doing this. I really do. Everyday Christians sharing their walk with Christ. How do people make it without faith? I don't know. We're not done. At the bottom of the hour, Casper Stockham will be coming our way. I've got to make some preparations for him. While I'm doing that, I offer you a challenge that I use myself, and it's benefited me. The challenge is in the form of 2 questions. Here they are. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done for Jesus Christ? The second question, just how long ago was that? And the challenge is to never be satisfied with either answer.